Barrett.
As Ceann Corla. Well, as an urban TD, first of all, I'm obviously very conscious that I don't have the day-to-day experience of what is happening in rural Ireland, so in that regard, I have to rely to a large extent on insights from those whose judgment I would trust. So some of what I say will come from people who are living in rural Ireland and have particular views about what is going on in rural Ireland. And others are slightly more general observations. And I want to start with the slightly more general observation. First of all, from the point of view of people who live in urban Ireland, I think it is important for us to recognise we have an interest in not seeing the underdevelopment of rural Ireland, or the degradation of rural Ireland, or the depopulation of rural Ireland. And I think it's important to stress that. People living in urban Ireland may not think so. It mightn't seem very immediate to them, but in fact the excessive concentration of population, and therefore of all the pressures for infrastructure, for housing, for services and so on, in a very small area around Dublin and some of the other big cities, is bad for everybody. It's bad for rural Ireland and it's bad for urban Ireland. So in my opinion, we all have an interest in balanced regional development, even to address the things that are affecting us right now, in the here and now, whether it's housing, the pressure on housing prices, rents, and so on. That's the first point. Second point I want to make is that there is a narrative that suggests otherwise, that there's an urban-rural divide and that one gains at the expense of the other. And it's just coincidental, as I was thinking about what I'd say in this debate, that shortly after I'm going to a debate in my own Oireachtas committee, the Budget Scrutiny Committee, where, as we said at my suggestion, but fair play to the committee for taking it up, we are going to be doing a module on wealth tax, on the need, or the Oxfam making the case for a wealth tax. And there's some very interesting background papers that they have produced, which are relevant to this debate. What the background papers produced by the PBO and my own committee secretariat and reinforced with Oxfam, first of all, start with, is the gross and growing inequality in the distribution of wealth in Ireland in general. They show that, for example, the top 10% of the population of households have 47% of all of the wealth. So there's a massive, and it's growing, concentration of the wealth in the hands of a relatively small number of the population. Now, why is that interesting? Because also there's a geographical aspect to this, which is very, very stark. 55% of net wealth is in the eastern and midland areas. 30% of it is in the southern region. And the area that has the least of it is the west and north of the country, which has only 14% of the wealth. So there's a very, very stark inequality in the distribution of wealth. But I think if you also marry that with some other facts that we saw in the Tagish survey the other day, on farm incomes. Average farm income varies absolutely radically. It shows, again, gross inequalities. I mean, shocking inequalities. So the average dairy farmer has an income of €97,000, and I'm sure there's plenty of medium-sized dairy farmers that don't have that sort of income. So we can almost be certain that is, again, concentrated in very, very small hands. But then you have the average beef farmer on €16,000. I mean, how could anybody live on €16,000? The average sheep farmer, a little bit better, €20,000. But those poorest of farmers, living on a fraction of the income of the wealthiest farmers, make up the vast, vast majority of farmers. The vast, vast majority. 84 of the 135,000 farms in this country are of the poor kind, living on absolutely miserable incomes. So there is a very, very important alignment of a gross inequality in the distribution of wealth and a gross inequality in terms of rural Ireland and incomes in rural Ireland. And to kind of reinforce that point, before this, I rang up Jerry Loftus from the Rural Ireland organisation, say, what would you say if you were to say, what is the central problem that needs to be addressed in rural Ireland? And he said, more or less, there won't be a rural Ireland in about 10 or 20 years' time, or not much of it, because of the industrial model of agriculture that has been developed in this country, which is destroying the small and medium farmer to the benefit of a very small number of very wealthy farmers and the agri-industrial sector, where all the wealth and all the benefit of our agriculture is concentrated. He made the point that the opposition to the nature restoration law was completely ridiculous, in his opinion, was a fake debate, and that in fact, if we didn't deal with the issue of biodiversity destruction and the destruction of water quality, reinforced in the report that we've seen in the next while, there won't be any agriculture left because we won't have the water to actually sustain the agriculture, because we have an agricultural model that is based on an industrial model primarily for export, which benefits a small minority, damages our environment, and you can say exactly the same thing about forestry, but does nothing for the small farmer. Actually is leading to poverty for the small farmer and is putting the small farmers out of business. Another sort of anecdotal instance of this, I was down during the week off of the recess down in Brandon in County Kerry, staying with a friend of mine whose father is a sheep farmer, one of those small farmers. And I said, you know, what's going to, you know, when you look at the incomes they're talking about, what's going to happen to this farm in a few years' time? And he said, you know, there's nobody to take this farm over. Because who could? He's got kids, but who would take it over at that level of income? And I said, and by the way, he's very strongly in favour of increasing biodiversity, of diversifying, you know, he's supportive of the climate agenda and the biodiversity agenda, but he said there's no real interaction with rural communities and with the small farmers in terms of how do we do these things in a way that doesn't destroy small towns, doesn't destroy the small farmer, but actually listens to them and engages with them about how you can sustain incomes and life and community in rural Ireland. So to me, they're a very important message. The other thing Jerry Loftus was also just saying to me was about the absolutely shocking, this isn't news, I'm sure it's been repeated here, but just about the shocking lack of investment in transport in what he called the BMW area, the border, Midland and West. I hadn't heard that expression before, but in transport links in that region, which he's the blame for which he put squarely at the feet of Fine Gael for, apparently, I wasn't aware of this, opting the northwest area out of the T10 scheme, which is European funding, a lot of which could have meant European funding was used to invest in transport infrastructure and other infrastructure transport infrastructure in the border, Midland and West region, but was for some reason the government opted that region out of that scheme. Last point I just want to make in the last 40 seconds is, it seems to me, you know, everybody accepts that afforestation, forestry and so on, for climate reasons, for biodiversity reasons, has to be significantly expanded, but of a very, very different model of the sort that we have at the moment, that is damaging to the environment, is not good for communities, is not helping the small farmers, and a critical part of that is the urgent need to change the mandate and the approach of Coillte, the State Forestry Company, in terms of how it interacts with communities, small farmers and so on. And it seems to me the government need to urgently address the question of radically reforming the mandate of Coillte, which is also operating on that industrial model which is not good for rural Ireland or for the small and medium farmer.